You stand in the dark corridor of a medieval monastery, candlelight bleeding against the stone like an open wound. The air is damp, heavy with the stink of old incense, wax and mildew. You hear whispers low, urgent, almost desperate, coming from behind a heavy wooden door that was meant to stay locked after Compline. Push it open and you see them. A young novice, pale with hunger, trembling as he kneels before the abbot. The abbot's face is half hidden by shadow, his hand tracing the sign of the cross in the air, like some mock blessing. The boy's body shakes not from piety, but from the pull of something, both carnal and damned. This is no love story. This is power disguised as ritual. A commandment dressed in robes. A hunger pretending to be holy. The church forbade almost everything to do with sex. No kissing outside marriage. No touching yourself. No lying with a woman during her bleeding days. No betting your spouse on feast days, fast days, Sundays, Fridays, or before taking communion. By the time the list was done, there were fewer legal nights for marital intercourse than there were stars over the cloister courtyard. And yet here you are, staring at a scene that violates every one of those rules in the span of a single breath. The monks had a word for it. Luxuria. Not just lust, but excess desire. To them, lust wasn't simply a sin, it was a rot that could drag a whole community to hell. The more you wanted, the less you were human. But rules only sharpened temptation. The harder the church clamped down, the darker the shadows where desire hid. And people found ways, secret ways, dangerous ways. The young novice closes his eyes as the abbot whispers a prayer. The prayer is not for God. It is a bargain with silence. You realize in that moment that medieval sexual life wasn't just regulated, it was choreographed. Every movement had to fit inside the tight, suffocating cage of taboo. And if you slipped, if you gave in, the punishment wasn't just eternal flames. It was public ruin, shame, branding, death. But worse than punishment was the lie everyone agreed to tell. That desire did not exist here. That these stone walls were pure. That whispers like this never happened. You feel the door shut behind you, the air growing colder, as if history itself has trapped you inside a chamber where sin and silence breathe the same stale air. And this is only the first door. What happens when a culture builds so many locks that desire must crawl in through the cracks? Flesh under commandment. Step out of the monastery and into the world beyond Europe in the 13th century, where the church had extended its grip into every bed, every body, every breath. Picture a wedding night in England, circa 1250. The couple kneels before a priest, not for blessing, but for a set of instructions. Yes, instructions, because even consummation had rules. Position mattered, intent mattered. The only permitted form was the so-called missionary position. Man on top, woman beneath, in silence and without joy. Anything else writing, touching, even too much kissing was branded sodomy. Imagine the absurdity. Your first night as husband and wife, and the church is already in bed with you. If you disobeyed, you risked not only confession but eternal damnation. Sex upside down, punishable. Anal or oral. Mortal sin. Pleasure itself was suspect, because pleasure implied freedom, and freedom was a threat. And this is where ritual came in. The calendar of the medieval church carved up sexual possibility into tiny rations. Advent, no sex. Lent, no sex. Rogation days, none. Quatuor tempora, forbiddens. In some years, half the nights were outlawed. The irony? These same priests, who dictated abstinence, were often tangled in their own scandals, keeping mistresses, fathering children, or abusing their spiritual authority. Dry sarcasm time. It's hard to take a vow of chastity seriously when the man delivering it has 3 illegitimate sons running around the parish. Yet, the rules stuck. Not because they were holy, but because they gave the church control. The human body became a battlefield. Sexual desire wasn't privated, it was policed. Think about confession. You kneel in the box, heart hammering, as the priest asks invasive questions. Did you touch yourself? Did you lie with your wife when she bled? Did you take her from behind? The intimacy of desire became a crime scene. Your body was evidence, and people broke anyway. They always did. In hushed brothels outside city walls, in haylofts behind church altars. Desire, cornered, always finds a way out. But it came at a price. Take the story of Marjorie of Rouen, accused in 1311 of lying with her husband in forbidden times. The neighbors testified. The priest confirmed. Her penance? To walk barefoot through the streets, wearing nothing but a shift, a candle in her hand, while the town spat at her. Her crime wasn't lust, it was timing. That's the cruelty of taboo. It takes what is natural and twists it into scandal. And the most chilling part? People believed it. They believed that breaking these sexual calendars could invite plague, famine, or even damn the entire community. Desire wasn't just personal, it was contagious. Now the question becomes, if sexuality was so tightly locked, how did ordinary people fight back? In the next chamber, you'll see the secret rituals people invented to reclaim their flesh from the jaws of taboo. Ritual as resistance. You walk into a peasant cottage, far from the church bells, where survival matters more than doctrine. A fire burns low. A woman whispers charms over herbs. She ties a red ribbon around her waist. This is no priest's ritual. This is resistance. Because while the church carved commandments, the people carved counter-rituals. Folk magic, pagan survivals, quiet acts of rebellion. Take Germany, 14th century. Couples sometimes performed charms of union before bedding, invoking not saints but rivers, stones, or ancestral spirits. The ritual went like this. The man would place a loaf of bread under the bed. The woman would spit 3 times into the hearth, and both would say a rhyme half prayer, half mockery of the church. It was a small thing, but it made the act theirs, not Rome's. Or look to New England Puritans 2 centuries later. Officially, they were the most sexually repressive culture you could imagine. But behind the facade, couples invented coded ways of bending rules. Bundling, for example, young men and women allowed to sleep together, fully clothed, wrapped in blankets, under watch. It was supposed to prevent sin. In practice, let's just say wool blankets weren't much of a barrier. Everywhere, you see cracks in the edifice. Women wore amulets to protect against pregnancy when priests offered no protection except abstinence. Men carved obscene faces into tavern beams as a kind of middle finger to moral authority. Carnival itself was a ritual inversion. Once a year, people dressed as priests, mocked holy laws, and gorged on the very pleasures they were denied. Sarcasm moment. Nothing says, we're holy like throwing a parade where the village drunk pretends to be the bishop while flashing his bare ass to the crowd. But under the laughter was defiance. Because every charm, every obscene carving, every hidden tryst was a way of saying, our bodies are not entirely yours. And then there were the legends, the whispered tales of saints who had secretly broken rules. Stories circulated of Saint Agnes, who supposedly laughed in the face of chastity vows, or Saint Wilgefortis, who grew a beard to avoid marriage. These half-true, half-invented stories gave the desperate something to cling to. Even holy figures bent the rules. But here's the danger. Ritual resistance gave people power, but it also painted a target on their backs. What the church could not control, it branded witchcraft. And once the word witch was spoken, the fire was never far behind. Which brings you to the most terrifying part of all, when sex itself was labeled sorcery. Sex is witchcraft. The courtroom stinks of sweat and wax. It is Salem, 1692. A girl stands accused. The charge? That she lay with the devil, that she spread disease through lust, that she bewitched men by her gaze. This isn't an isolated story. Across Europe and America, for centuries, sexuality and witchcraft were bound together like corpse and coffin. Women accused of illicit sex were often accused of magic in the same breath. Desire was too dangerous to leave unnamed. It had to be demonized. The infamous Malleus Maleficarum of 1487 spelled it out. Women were more lustful than men, more corruptible, more easily swayed by the devil. The book raved that witches used sex to steal men's seed, ride demons in the night, and spread impotence. It wasn't theology, it was pornography disguised as doctrine. Think about the cruelty. A woman who wanted too much, or even wanted it all, became a threat to the cosmic order. Her body was evidence. Her womb was a weapon. And so thousands of women burned. Case in point, in Würzburg, Germany, 1629, over 900 people were executed for witchcraft in a frenzy of fear. Many charges centered on filthy intercourse with Satan. Imagine being hauled to the stake because someone saw you laugh too freely, or because your husband failed in bed and blamed it on your enchantments. And of course, the sarcasm writes itself. Nothing screams God's justice like torturing a widow until she confesses to having orgies with demons. But beneath the absurdity was a chilling truth. By calling sex witchcraft, authorities turned the most private human act into evidence of treason against heaven. It was the ultimate control tactic: fear your own body, or it might betray you at trial. You picture the girl in Salem trembling as the minister shouts scripture. She swears she never lay with the devil. The crowd doesn't believe her. In their eyes, she's already marked. Because once sex becomes witchcraft, innocence is impossible. And the question hangs, sharp as a blade: what happens to a culture when even desire itself becomes a crime too dangerous to name? The calendar of sign. You sit at a wooden table in a peasant hut, a tallow candle dripping on rough boards. A husband and wife whisper to each other, counting on their fingers. Not money, not food, days. Because the medieval church turned the calendar itself into a weapon. There were forbidden days for sex: Lent, Advent, Rogation days, Fridays, feast days, vigils before saints' days, and the 40 days before Easter. Out of 365, almost half the year was close to intimacy. Imagine being newlyweds in 1350. You've waited months for marriage. The feast is done, and now the priest tells you, you can't touch each other until after Lent. 40 days. Then another round of fasting in Advent. Then the holy feasts. A year shrinks quickly when you live inside God's stopwatch. The obsession reached absurd heights. Some penitential handbooks counted exact penalties. Lie with your wife on Easter? Do 3 years of penance. Sleep with her during Lent? 7 years. And heaven forbid she is menstruating, your punishment could double. One can only imagine the anxiety. Every touch weighed against eternity. Sex became less about pleasure, more about careful accounting. The bedchamber turned into a courtroom, the sheets a ledger. The irony? Birth rates stayed high. People broke rules in secret, confessing later, then breaking them again. It was human nature versus divine math, and human nature always cheated. But the guilt? That lingered. Whole generations grew up believing that desire itself dragged the world closer to plague and famine. And it raises a terrifying question. If your own body is a time bomb of sin, how do you ever escape? The answer is you don't. You simply shift the burden to someone else, and often, that someone else was a woman. Women as scapegoats. You walk through a market square in France, 14th century. A woman is dragged by her hair, thrown before a crowd. The charge is simple: too much desire. In medieval thought, women were the source of sin. From Eve to Jezebel, from Delilah to nameless prostitutes, female sexuality was painted as poison. Augustine wrote that women were the gate of the devil. The Malleus Maleficarum declared that women's lust was insatiable. If a man stumbled, it was her fault. If a priest broke his vow, the woman tempted him. If crops failed, it was because of her illicit charms. Marriage laws hammered it home. A wife's body wasn't hers, it belonged to her husband. She could not refuse him, but he could accuse her. If she sought pleasure, it was adultery of the heart. If she resisted, it was sin of disobedience. The hypocrisy is breathtaking. Priests thundered against female desire from pulpits while keeping concubines in secret. Lawmakers criminalized women's adultery while shrugging at men's brothel visits. And when famine, plague, or war struck, who bore the blame? Women, midwives accused of killing babies, widows accused of luring demons, prostitutes accused of spreading disease. Take the story of Alice Keitler, accused in 1324 in Ireland. Wealthy, outspoken, and widowed 4 times, she became a lightning rod. Her enemies accused her of using sorcery to seduce men, of sleeping with demons, of mixing potions with her lover's semen. She escaped to England, but her servant, Petronilla, was burned alive in her place. That's the brutal pattern. A culture strangles sexuality with taboos, then scapegoats women for breaking them. And the crowd in the square? They cheer as the woman is flogged, as if her punishment keeps their own guilt at bay. But guilt never vanishes, it only mutates. And sometimes it erupts in public rituals of humiliation that blur punishment and theater. Public shame as ritual. You stand in the heart of a town square. A cucking stool waits by the riverbank. A woman, accused of being unchaste or scolding, is strapped in. The crowd gathers, jeering, laughing. Children throw stones. The mayor nods and she is dunked into the freezing water. Public shaming wasn't just punishment, it was ritual. A collective exorcism of lust and disobedience. Instead of private confession, you became the sermon. Take the Skimmington ride. In England, if a husband was cuckolded, the wife might be paraded through town on a donkey, facing backward, while pots and pans clanged. People laughed, spat, and shouted obscene rhymes. Her body became the stage on which everyone else proved their own virtue. Or the scold's bridle, an iron mask locked onto the mouth of a woman accused of gossip, adultery, or seduction. Some even had spikes that cut her tongue if she tried to speak. Imagine the claustrophobia, the taste of rust and blood. Dry sarcasm moment. Nothing shows Christian mercy like gagging a woman with a spiked muzzle and marching her through the streets. These rituals blurred law and theater. They weren't just punishments, they were spectacles of control. And they carried a twisted pleasure. The crowd watching felt morally superior. They got to indulge in the thrill of humiliation while pretending it was holy. But here's the horror. Once desire becomes a spectacle, cruelty becomes entertainment. And entertainment demands escalation. Which is why in time, punishment for sexual taboo grew bloodier, stranger, and more theatrical than ever. The theater of punishment. The execution ground reeks of smoke. A man stands chained, accused of sodomy. The charge is not whispered, it is shouted from the scaffold. The crowd jeers, eager for the flames. From the 12th to 16th centuries, sodomy was treated as a capital crime across Europe. In Florence, men were branded, castrated, or burned. In England, hanging was common. In Spain, the Inquisition piled wood high for anyone caught in unnatural acts. Punishment wasn't about justice, it was theater. By killing one man publicly, authorities taught the crowd what to fear. Every cry, every burst of flame was a sermon in flesh. And it wasn't only men. Women accused of adultery could be drowned in sacks, stoned, or whipped through towns. In some places, adulterers were forced to parade naked, their genitals smeared with tar, while the crowd mocked them. It was cruelty dressed as morality, horror disguised as holiness. Think of it. Desire, one of the most private human experiences, dragged into daylight, torn apart, and consumed as entertainment. And yet, the same culture that burned sodomites in daylight secretly filled manuscripts with erotic drawings, whispered bawdy songs, and kept brothels open under royal license. Hypocrisy wasn't the flaw, it was the system. Sarcasm writes itself again. Apparently, nothing says God's kingdom like running state-owned brothels during the week and burning sex workers on Sunday. But here's the dark truth: violence only amplified desire. Every burning, every humiliation only drove sexuality deeper underground, where it festered and took on stranger forms. Which leads you into the next chamber of this labyrinth, where repressed sexuality turned into visions, nightmares, and even holy ecstasies. You kneel in a candle-lit chapel, the smell of frankincense clinging to your skin. A nun lies prostrate before the altar, trembling. She isn't dying, she's in rapture. Her lips whisper the name of Christ, but her body convulses as if taken by something else. Welcome to the strange intersection where repression bled into ecstasy. In the Middle Ages, female mystics reported visions that read more like erotic encounters than holy revelations. Saint Teresa of Avila described an angel piercing her with a burning spear, leaving her all on fire with great love of God. Bernini carved her in marble, face tilted back, mouth open, body limp, ecstasy mistaken for holiness. Or was holiness just desire in disguise? It wasn't only Teresa. Marjorie Kemp of England wept, moaned, and wailed in churches, describing Christ as her lover. Catherine of Siena starved herself into visions, whispering of divine union that blurred hunger, pain, and longing. These women lived in a world where female sexuality was condemned, yet their ecstasies made them untouchable. The same church that gagged adulteresses published their visions. But don't miss the irony. What was forbidden in the bedroom became canonized in the chapel. Sarcasm lands hard here. Apparently, you can't enjoy your husband, but if you enjoy an invisible angel stabbing you with love's spear, that's holy enough for sainthood. The truth? Repression doesn't kill desire. It warps it, redirects it, sanctifies it, makes it stranger. And if the body became divine theater, the line between holy rapture and demonic possession blurred dangerously thin. So how could anyone tell whether ecstasy was a gift from God or a pact with the devil? The devil's caress. The courtroom is hot with torches. A woman screams under interrogation. The priest demands to know, did she lie with the devil? Did he visit her in her bed at night? Did he leave marks upon her flesh? This is the nightmare of the incubus and succubus. For centuries, people believed demons came in the night to steal seed, seduce women, or leave men drained. Entire treatises debated whether nocturnal emissions were medical, mystical, or demonic. The Inquisition seized on it. Accused witches were stripped, searched for witches' marks. A mole, a scar, a birthmark. These marks were said to be where demons suckled. Proof of intercourse with the infernal. Imagine the violation. A woman, naked before men of God, her skin prodded, her shame turned into evidence. The obsession wasn't fringe, it was doctrine. Thomas Aquinas wrote that demons could collect semen from men, then impregnate women as succubi and incubi. Theologians turned sex into spiritual warfare, every bit a potential battlefield. And of course, accusations followed. A man caught in adultery claimed the woman bewitched him. A child born deformed? Proof of demonic intercourse. A priest plagued by wet dreams? Blame the devil's daughters. The absurdity hides something darker. The church gave itself license to treat desire as treason, to turn private acts into cosmic crimes. You hear the accused woman in the courtroom, begging no, pleading that she never lay with the devil. But the crowd doesn't need proof. They already believe. Because once sex itself is branded demonic, there is no innocence. And innocence mattered little anyway, once the state realized sex could be taxed, licensed, and sold under holy approval. Brothels of the Holy Empire step into a city street. Strasbourg, 5th-10th century. A lantern swings above a doorway marked with a crude painting of a woman. This is no secret den. It is a municipal brothel, legal, taxed, church-watched. Here lies one of history's most grotesque contradictions. The same culture that burned sodomites and flogged adulteresses openly ran brothels, not in back alleys, but with licenses. Some were even owned by bishops. The logic? If lust couldn't be eradicated, it could be controlled. Better men spend coin than commit greater sins. Prostitutes were branded as necessary evils, their bodies treated as civic plumbing, ugly, essential, ignored. But the regulation was brutal. Women were confined to red light districts, forced to wear special clothes, yellow veils in Venice, striped hoods in Paris, bells on their skirts in England. Their presence was tolerated, but they were marked like cattle. And still, hypocrisy dripped from every wall. Kings visited brothels by night, then outlawed them by day. Priests preached chastity, then crept into the licensed houses. The women paid the heaviest price. They bore the stigma, the disease, the violence. And when plague struck, they were blamed as carriers. Brothels were shut down, women driven out, sometimes executed. Dry sarcasm cuts in. Medieval society basically said, "We'll tax your body to keep our men in line, then burn you alive for the diseases we gave you." Brothels weren't freedom. They were another ritual of controlled desire managed like livestock, fenced in by law and taboo. But what happens when desire refuses to be fenced? When it bleeds into heresy, rebellion, and visions of a new world? The answer comes in fire and in blood, when sexuality itself becomes a weapon against authority. Desire as heresy. The year is 1534. The Anabaptist of Munster sees the city, declaring a new kingdom of God. Their leader, Jan van Leyden, claims divine authority and with it, the right to take multiple wives. The city becomes a theocratic commune, where polygamy is law, not sin. For a moment, desire turns revolutionary. Ritual taboos shatter. Marriage laws bend. But the result isn't freedom, it is terror. Women forced into unions, dissenters executed, the city starved into collapse. This isn't an isolated case. Throughout history, heretical sects often tied sexuality to their visions. The free spirit movement of the 14th century believed true union with God meant sexual union on earth. The ranters in 17th century England mocked marriage, sharing partners in secret rites. Every time, authorities struck back with fury. Heresy wasn't just theological, it was sexual. To defy sexual law was to defy cosmic order. Desire became rebellion, and rebellion demanded fire. Think of the irony. The church spent centuries preaching that lust would topple empires. Then, in Munster, it nearly did. But the pattern is clear. Taboo breeds rebellion. The more the body is chained, the more it strains against the lock. You feel it in the silence after Munster's fall. A kingdom of lust turned to ash, its survivors paraded in cages, their corpses hung in iron baskets. And you know the story isn't over. Because repression doesn't end with fire, it seeps into the cracks, mutating into the hidden vices of the very men who claim to guard morality. You sit in the dim backroom of a cathedral, the smell of damp stone and wine heavy in the air. The priest who thunders against lust on Sundays now unlaces his cassock. A woman waits, silent, knowing she cannot refuse. This was the ugliest secret of all. The men who set the rules often broke them. Clerical celibacy became law in the 12th century, but enforcement was patchwork. Priests kept concubines. Bishops fathered children. Popes themselves, Alexander VI, for example, kept mistresses openly, parading his bastard children through Rome. The hypocrisy was staggering. Ordinary people were whipped for forbidden unions, while churchmen lived as lords of both flesh and spirit. And yet, the rhetoric stayed the same. Sex was dangerous, desire needed chains, women were corrupters. Sarcasm cuts in. Nothing screams holiness like lecturing peasants about chastity with one hand, while cradling your mistress with the other. But beyond hypocrisy was violence. Women kept by priests had no rights, no protections. Many were discarded, their children branded illegitimate. Some were forced into convents, their silence purchased by vows they never chose. The public knew. They joked in taverns, whispered about brothels run for clergy, mocked priests in plays. But laughter was also a shield, because to accuse openly was to risk heresy. And so the system continued, built on silence, sustained by fear. But silence never lasts forever. Sometimes it erupts through rumor, confession, or scandal so large it cannot be contained. The whisper networks picture a medieval village at dusk. Women gather at the well, buckets clanging, voices low. They share knowledge in whispers, which herbs to chew to stop a pregnancy, which nights to avoid the priest's eye, which midwife can be trusted. This was survival. Beneath the crushing weight of taboo, underground networks kept secret practices alive. In England, women passed down recipes, pennyroyal, rue, tansy, dangerous herbs that could end a pregnancy when men offered no safe recourse. In France, bawdy songs mocked priests and lords alike, carrying sexual satire from tavern to tavern. In Italy, young lovers carved obscene graffiti into church walls, defiance etched in stone where even sermons couldn't scrub it away. These weren't rebellions with banners. They were quiet, resilient acts of endurance. Every whisper, every herb, every obscene drawing said the same thing. Desire belongs to us, not to the men who police it. Of course, discovery was deadly. A midwife accused of witchcraft. A bawdy ballad denounced as heresy. A woman who knew too much burned for consorting with the devil, and yet the whispers never died. You can still trace them in court records, in secret diaries, in marginal notes on manuscripts, where scribes doodled naked figures beside psalms. It's a haunting thought. While priests thundered from pulpits, entire hidden cultures of resistance were breathing quietly under their noses. And those whispers echo still because the past has a way of crawling back into the present, haunting the present. You walk into a modern church, the candles flicker, the hymns echo, the language has softened, but the old shadows remain. Think about it. Rules about sex tied to calendars, shame around pleasure, silence around abuse, whispers in back rooms. It isn't medieval anymore, but doesn't it feel familiar? The legacy of ritual and taboo didn't vanish, it mutated. In purity movements, in laws that still police bodies, in scandals that keep surfacing from institutions sworn to holiness. And the echoes of resistance survive too. Songs, satire, whispered knowledge passed down by those who refuse to surrender their flesh. History isn't dead stone, its breath still on your neck. When you hear a sermon about lust, when a body is shamed for desire, when a law tells you when or how you can love, you are standing in the same dark corridor as that medieval novice, listening to the abbot's whisper. The Gothic truth is simple and terrifying. Repression never kills desire. It only drives it deeper into the cracks where it festers, mutates, and returns sharper than before. And so you're left with the question the past never answered. If the body is always haunted by rules, whispers, and punishments, will desire ever truly be free? Or will we always live by candlelight, trapped between ritual and taboo, hearing the same old whispers through the keyhole of history?